It was just another ordinary night, until the silence of Eastwood High's gym was broken by the sound of a secret too chilling to ignore. The faint hum of the overhead lights buzzed softly, a sound too mundane to feel threatening, yet in the stillness, it became almost unbearable. The air was cold, heavy with a quiet that pressed down like a warning. A sudden crash shattered the calm. The sharp, jarring sound of something heavy hitting the polished floor echoed off the empty walls, reverberating into the hollow silence. The floor, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights, reflected fragments of something terrible. Bloodied footprints stretched across the gym, streaked and uneven, leading to what could only be described as a tragedy. A cheerleading pom-pom lay torn and discarded, a single cheer shoe tipped on its side. And there, lifeless, was Imani Carter. Her cheerleading uniform was ripped, her body motionless on the cold floor. One hand was outstretched, her fingers wrapped tightly around her phone, as though she had tried to summon help in her final moments. The door creaked open. A narrow beam of light wavered into the room, trembling as it moved. The janitor entered cautiously, his breath uneven, his steps hesitant. His flashlight scanned the scene, its glow revealing each unsettling detail. His hands trembled as he took in the torn pom-pom, the footprints, and then her body. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He fumbled for his phone, his shaking hands struggling to dial. Behind him, faint footsteps echoed softly. He turned abruptly, startled as Detective Marcus Reed stepped into the room. Reed's sharp gaze swept the scene, taking in every detail with quiet precision. He moved with calm authority, unshaken by the grim reality before him. Where the janitor's fear was palpable, Reed's focus was unwavering. Kneeling beside Imani, Reed's eyes fell on a silver whistle lying near her hand. His attention shifted to her phone, the screen flickering faintly with an unfinished message. The words stared back at him. "Coach Malik, he did this. You need to know." Reed's expression darkened as he stood, his mind already piecing together fragments of a larger story. His voice cut through the heavy silence, deliberate and steady. What truth was she trying to reveal? The gym fell silent once more, the hum of the lights now a hollow backdrop. The phone remained clutched in Imani's fingers, as though it held the answers to everything left unsaid. The trail of blood, the scattered fragments, the unfinished message, each clue whispered of a story that had just begun. Detective Reed stood silently in the gym, his gaze fixed on the lifeless body of Imani Carter. Questions swirled in his mind, questions about who she was and how her life had led to this tragic end. He turned to the janitor, his tone firm but contemplative. "Tell me about her," Reed said. "I need to know who she was." And just like that, the image of Imani Carter began to take shape. Not as a victim, but as a vibrant, complex young woman whose story was far from ordinary. Imani Carter had always seemed to glide effortlessly across the polished floors of Eastwood High. Her smile was radiant, her movements graceful, every step exuding the confidence of a star cheerleader. To everyone watching, she was flawless, admired by her peers, celebrated for her talent, the picture of success. But behind the cheers and applause, Imani carried a secret she kept even from herself. After practice, when the gym lights dimmed and the crowd disappeared, Imani retreated to the quiet of her room. There, the mask she wore so perfectly began to slip. Her journal sat open in her lap, its pages a safe haven for the thoughts she couldn't speak aloud. Her pen trembled as she wrote, the words spilling out like a confession. "Why can't I ever feel good enough?" The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the faint scratching of her pen and the distant hum of the world outside her window. She would glance up at her reflection, catching her own gaze in the mirror. The face that stared back was perfect, immaculate hair, a crisp uniform, but it felt like a stranger's. No amount of perfection could quiet the voice inside her, whispering that it was never enough. The hallways of Eastwood High buzzed with energy, filled with the noise of laughter and conversation. Friends called out to her with bright smiles and casual praise. "Great routine, Imani. You nailed it again." But their words skimmed the surface, never quite reaching the depth of who she was. She smiled back, gracious and polite, but as soon as their attention shifted elsewhere, the warmth in her eyes faded. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt more alone. At lunch, she often sat with her teammates, a cluster of energy and chatter. But while they talked, joked and laughed, Imani drifted into silence. Her gaze wandered to the windows, lost in thoughts she couldn't share. The noise of the cafeteria faded to a dull hum. No one noticed the distance growing in her eyes. At home, her parents were loving, but their lives were full. Her mother often called out from the kitchen, her voice warm but distracted. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart. How was practice?" Her father glanced up from his laptop with a quick nod of approval before returning to his work. They cared deeply, but their attention was stretched thin. Imani responded with a soft smile, murmured a quick reply, and disappeared into her room. There, behind the closed door, the silence wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She opened her journal once more, the pages already filled with fragments of self-doubt. She wrote of her successes, her routines, and the expectations she carried. But as her pen slowed, one sentence stood out, written over and over. "Why do I feel so invisible?" The question lingered in her mind long after the ink had dried. Moments of isolation followed her everywhere, creeping into the spaces between the applause and the praise. A fleeting glance from a classmate, a teacher's offhand comment, a teammate's laughter that somehow felt distant. It all added to the quiet weight pressing on her. Piece by piece, the feeling of being unseen grew heavier, carving out a hollow space within her. And then there was him. Coach Malik had approached her one evening after practice, his voice calm but encouraging. "You've got talent, Imani, real talent." The words seemed simple, almost professional, but they stayed with her. There was something in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, that lingered long after he walked away. For a brief moment, she wondered if someone might truly understand her. She brushed the thought aside, but it refused to disappear entirely. Imani Carter's life was a paradox. She stood under the spotlight, basking in the cheers of an adoring crowd, yet carried the crushing weight of loneliness behind closed doors. Every step she took, every smile she gave, every routine she perfected, it all felt like a performance, a desperate attempt to fill the void that no one else could see. And as the days passed, the distance between who she was and who she pretended to be only seemed to grow. Imani Carter stayed late after practice, as she often did, pushing herself long after the gym had emptied. The sound of her sneakers against the polished floor echoed in the vast space, blending with the faint hum of the overhead lights. She was determined, precise, and focused, but exhausted. As she caught her breath, her movements slowed, and her thoughts grew heavier. Coach Malik had noticed. At first, his presence seemed purely professional. "You've got real potential, Imani. Keep pushing yourself," he'd said during practice. His tone was encouraging, almost fatherly. But over time, his words began to linger in ways she hadn't expected. One evening, as she finished her routine, he approached with a different kind of energy. "You're different from the others," he told her. "You've got something special." Imani felt the warmth of his praise settle in her chest. He wasn't like her classmates or even her teachers. Malik noticed things others didn't: her work ethic, her discipline, her resilience. "I see how hard you work," he said. "It shows." His words felt genuine, as if he truly understood her. And for someone who so often felt unseen, his attention became a quiet refuge. After practice, he started staying a little longer, offering advice and sharing stories about his own struggles with discipline and perseverance. His voice was calm, soothing, and steady, and Imani found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone else. When he asked about her home life, how her parents were, how she was balancing everything, she hesitated, then told him the truth. It was hard. Her parents were supportive, but distant. Her friends admired her, but didn't truly know her. For the first time, she admitted how lonely she felt, and Malik listened. "That's what makes you different," he said softly. "You don't let it show. You carry all of it and still manage to shine." His words struck a chord deep within her, giving her the validation she didn't even know she craved. He became her sounding board, someone she could talk to after long days, someone who seemed to see her not just as a cheerleader, but as a person. It started with simple texts. "Great job today," he wrote after practice one night. "Don't forget to get some rest." But as the weeks passed, the messages grew more personal. "You seemed a little off today. Everything okay at home?" The questions felt caring, almost protective, and Imani didn't think twice about answering. Malik always knew just what to say to make her feel understood. but something began to shift. His texts came later at night, sometimes past 10, asking how she was feeling or if she needed anything. He'd comment on her dedication, her strength, even her appearance in ways that felt slightly different, more personal. "You've been looking tired lately," he said one evening, "but you're still as sharp as ever." Imani told herself it was harmless. Malik was just being supportive, just looking out for her the way any good coach would. But a small, nagging voice in the back of her mind questioned why his attention made her feel both comforted and uneasy. In public, Malik's demeanor was flawless. He was the respected coach, admired by students and faculty alike. His words were always professional, his tone authoritative. But in private, there was something softer, more intimate in the way he spoke to Imani. He created a space where she felt safe, seen, even special. "I've coached a lot of talented students," he said one evening, his voice low. "But you've got something different. You're not like anyone else." The boundary between mentor and confidant began to blur. Malik's questions became more probing. "Do you ever feel like your friends really get you?" he asked her once. She shook her head, hesitant but honest. "That's what I thought," he said. "You've got so much going on beneath the surface. Most people wouldn't even notice." Imani wanted to believe he was just being kind, that his attention was the result of genuine care. But the way he lingered after practice, the way his voice softened when they were alone, it all felt like more than encouragement. Still, she brushed aside her discomfort, convincing herself that Malik was only trying to help. He saw her in ways no one else did, and she didn't want to let go of that. Yet even as she leaned into his praise and validation, a quiet unease began to take root. Malik's attention was intoxicating, but something about it felt too intense, too deliberate. And while Imani didn't realize it yet, she was stepping into a carefully laid trap, one built on trust, admiration, and the quiet erosion of boundaries. Imani couldn't stop thinking about the words Malik had spoken to her after practice the week before. "You're not like the others," he'd said, his tone steady, almost reverent. It had lingered in her mind, replaying late at night as she stared at her ceiling. Those simple words made her feel seen, validated in a way she hadn't felt in years. And now, as she stayed late after practice once again, she found herself hoping he would notice her. The gym was empty, its silence almost unnatural. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the space, blending with the squeak of Imani's sneakers as she practiced her routine alone. She pushed herself harder tonight, her movements sharp, her breaths uneven. A part of her wanted perfection, but another part wanted something else entirely, his approval. Then she heard him. "You're really giving it your all, aren't you?" She turned sharply to see Malik standing by the bleachers, his arms crossed, his expression both calm and observant. He stepped forward, his voice soft but deliberate. "You've been working harder than anyone else on this team." Imani felt her chest tighten. She wanted to brush it off, to laugh and thank him casually, but the warmth in his tone stopped her. It wasn't the kind of praise she was used to. It felt personal. "You've got something special, Imani," he continued, his gaze locked on hers. "The way you move, the way you focus, it's different. You don't just work hard, you mean it." The words sent a ripple through her. She glanced down, her heart racing, unsure if it was from exhaustion or something else. "Thanks, coach," she said quietly, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt the pull of his presence. He wasn't like anyone else. He noticed her. He stepped closer, his movements unhurried, as if he were in complete control of the moment. "But you need to take care of yourself," he said, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You push yourself too hard sometimes." The touch made her freeze. It wasn't forceful or inappropriate, but it lingered just a moment too long. Her breath caught, and she wasn't sure if it was unease or something she didn't want to admit, a strange comfort. "I'm just looking out for you," Malik added, his voice low, almost soothing. "You've got so much potential, but you've got to pace yourself." Imani nodded faintly, unsure of what to say. Her body felt tense, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to believe his words were harmless, that he was just a mentor who cared. But the way he looked at her, the way his presence filled the empty gym, it felt different. He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. "You deserve someone to see how hard you work," he said softly. "Someone to understand." Before she could respond, before she could process what was happening, his lips brushed hers. The kiss was quick, soft, and overwhelming. Imani froze, her mind racing. Guilt clashed with excitement. Discomfort collided with a strange sense of validation. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She was caught, paralyzed by the intensity of the moment. When Malik pulled back, his voice was barely a whisper. "This is our secret, Imani. No one else can know." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. She nodded, not because she agreed, but because she didn't know what else to do. Her thoughts were a whirlwind as she turned and walked toward the gym doors. Her sneakers echoed on the polished floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. The gym, once a place of comfort and achievement, now felt foreign, tainted by a moment she couldn't take back. As she walked home, her mind replayed it all, his words, his touch, his kiss. She felt torn between the pull of his attention and the unsettling truth she couldn't yet face. Something had shifted tonight, something she couldn't undo. Imani's world was shrinking, though she didn't see it that way. Not yet. Every late-night practice, every lingering moment with Malik felt like stepping closer to the only person who seemed to understand her. His words, once reserved and professional, had become something else entirely. "You're different, Imani. You're the most important person in my life," he had told her during one quiet evening. She clung to those words, turning them over in her mind, letting them anchor her in ways she couldn't explain. At school, she began to drift. Her friends would call her name in the cafeteria, but she'd barely hear them. She found excuses to skip team gatherings or left practice early, brushing off their concerns with vague answers. "Just tired," she'd say, even though they knew it wasn't true. The distance between Imani and her friends widened, but she barely noticed. Her focus had shifted entirely. It was Malik who filled the growing void. He was always there, offering a quiet comment after practice or texting her late at night with words that felt like they were meant only for her. "You work harder than anyone else. No one sees it the way I do," he'd say. And each time, Imani felt seen, validated in a way no one else had ever managed. But there were moments, fleeting and quiet, when unease crept in. Like the time he asked about her parents, pressing just enough to make her feel exposed. Or when his compliments started to linger, the way his hand did on her shoulder. She told herself it was harmless. He was just looking out for her. But deep down, something felt off. Her friends noticed the change. They tried to pull her back, their voices full of concern. "You don't hang out with us anymore, Imani. What's going on?" But she brushed them aside, the words too heavy to carry. She told herself they didn't understand. How could they? Malik made her feel special, seen. They couldn't possibly compete with that. And yet that small voice inside her wouldn't quiet. It whispered that the late-night messages and quiet conversations weren't as innocent as she wanted to believe. But each time doubt rose, Malik's words drowned it out. "Our bond is special, Imani. No one else could ever understand what we have," he said one evening, his tone soft and reassuring. It was a secret they shared, one that made her feel chosen and alone all at once. The lines blurred further with every interaction. At practice, he was the admired coach, professional and composed. But in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, his words carried a different weight. They felt heavier, more intimate. He framed their connection as something rare, something only they could understand. And though Imani felt the weight of secrecy, she couldn't help but crave his attention. Each day, the distance between Imani and her old life grew wider. Her friends, her family, even the team that had once been her world, they all felt so far away. Malik's presence had become her new center, the only constant in a world that felt increasingly isolating. But as she leaned on him more, she also began to feel something else, an unsettling sense that she was losing control. Late at night, as she lay awake, she wondered what had changed. How had it come to this? She thought of Malik's words, his praise, his quiet reassurances. They were what kept her going, what made her feel like she mattered. But she couldn't ignore the growing discomfort, the small voice telling her that something wasn't right. Imani was slipping further into Malik's grip, but she didn't know how to pull herself back. Each step felt both inevitable and irreversible. as though the walls around her were slowly closing in. And though she didn't yet realize it, the life she had once known was already slipping away. Imani finds herself alone with Malik again, the now familiar emptiness of the gym surrounding them like a cocoon. His voice carries softly through the silence, steady and soothing, his words landing like a lifeline. "You're extraordinary, Imani," he says, his tone wrapping around her insecurities like a comforting embrace. "What we have, it's something rare, something most people will never understand." She knows, deep down, that something isn't right. The rational part of her screams to pull away, to question why her heart races when he steps closer, or why her breath catches when his hand brushes hers. But his words are intoxicating. They echo the validation she has longed for, the recognition she's craved. She tells herself this isn't about crossing a line, it's about being seen, being valued. Malik inches closer, his presence magnetic yet suffocating. "You've always believed in love, haven't you, Imani?" he asks, his voice low and steady. "This is love. Real love, not the kind they talk about in fairy tales. This is honest, raw and true." His hand rests gently on her arm, his touch warm and deliberate, and she feels herself falter. Her instincts whisper warnings, but her heart betrays her resolve. Her mind is a storm. Memories of her childhood dreams, the promises she made to herself about purity, love and waiting, clash with the here and now. Malik's voice cuts through the noise, his words like a siren's song. "Don't overthink this, Imani," he says. "This isn't about rules or judgments. This is about us." Imani feels trapped, not by force, but by her own confusion. She wants to say no, to push him away, but the need for connection holds her back. Maybe he's right, she thinks, her thoughts spiraling. Maybe this is what I need. Maybe this is what it feels like to be alive. Her chest tightens as his hand moves to her face, his touch gentle yet commanding, and she can no longer find the strength to resist. When his lips meet hers, the moment feels both inevitable and surreal. It's not the magical, sweeping romance she once envisioned. It's something darker, more complicated. An act born out of manipulation and vulnerability rather than love. Yet in that fleeting moment, she convinces herself it's what she's been waiting for. That maybe, just maybe, this is what she deserves. As they part, Malik's voice is barely a whisper. "This is our moment, Imani. Don't let anyone take that away from you." The words linger in the air, heavy and suffocating. Imani feels her world shift, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a tidal wave. She knows there's no going back. She's crossed a line she can't uncross, and though she tells herself it was her choice, the guilt and confusion that follow are undeniable. That night, as she lies awake in her bed, the memory of his touch burns in her mind. She replays his words, trying to make sense of what's happened, but the answers elude her. She feels both elated and empty, torn between the validation he provides and the sinking realization that something is deeply, irreparably wrong. Imani doesn't know it yet, but the walls around her are closing in. Malik's grip is tightening, and the more she tries to convince herself that this is love, the more she loses sight of the person she used to be. Imani lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling as the memory of Malik's touch replayed in her mind. The sense of validation she had craved felt tainted now, weighed down by unease and guilt. She tried to convince herself it was love, but the quiet voice in her mind refused to be silenced. The next morning, the weight of it all hit her like a tidal wave. At practice, she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The laughter of her teammates sounded distant, and the gym, the place that once brought her joy, felt suffocating. The cracks in her world had begun to spread, and she didn't know how to stop them. The silence of the night wraps around Eastwood High as Imani retreats into the shadows of her once vibrant world. The gym doors are shut, the hallways quiet, but inside, the storm of her thoughts rages uncontrollably. She avoids the places where laughter and camaraderie used to define her days. Team gatherings? Skipped. Practice? Barely attended. Each excuse is rehearsed, but the truth, buried deep, is written across her face. Her teammates notice. Lexi's cheerful smile falters when Imani brushes past her without a word. Jada tries to reach out, but Imani turns away, claiming exhaustion or worse, silence. The physical distance mirrors the emotional chasm growing between her and the people who care about her. Her once open, radiant energy has dimmed into something closed off, guarded, and unrecognizable. But it's not just the outside world that's unraveling. Imani herself is a shadow of the person she once was. The bags under her eyes deepen, her hands tremble when she picks up a pen, and her focus shatters with the smallest distraction. The strain shows in every detail. The hair she no longer bothers to style, the slouched posture that betrays her exhaustion. It's as if the weight of her secret is pressing down on her, squeezing the air from her lungs. Late at night, in the faint glow of her desk lamp, Imani turns to the only place where she feels she can truly speak, her journal. Page after page, her fears bleed into the lines. "Why can't I stop this?" she writes with shaky hands. "Why do I need him to see me, to tell me I'm enough?" She pens her guilt, her confusion, her longing, and her regret. The words come in bursts, fragmented like her thoughts. She stares at the pages as if they might hold the answers, but they only reflect the depth of her turmoil. Paranoia begins to creep in, a silent spectre haunting her every step. In the cafeteria, she feels eyes lingering on her. In the hallway, whispers seem to follow her like an accusing shadow. Are they talking about her? Do they know? Her heart races with every fleeting glance, every innocent smile. Lexi and Jada, are they piecing it together? Did she say too much? Do they see through her mask? Imani begins to see enemies in every corner, suspicion colouring her view of even the kindest gestures. A joke between teammates sounds like veiled accusations. A passing glance feels like a dagger. The paranoia consumes her, clouding her thoughts, trapping her in a maze of imagined betrayal and real fear. Her world grows smaller and smaller, shrinking into the space between herself and Malik. He is the only one she allows near, the only one who knows her secret. But even his reassurances can't stop the spiral. Her own mind has become her prison, each thought a new chain binding her tighter. And as she sits alone, surrounded by silence, the walls of her isolation close in, threatening to suffocate her. Imani's unraveling has begun, and the question isn't whether she'll break, but when. Imani's withdrawal begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. The weight of her guilt, the constant tension of secrecy, and the creeping realization that something about her relationship with Malik feels wrong slowly chip away at her resolve. Late at night, as she stares at her reflection, she can no longer ignore the unease gnawing at her. Each touch, each lingering glance from Malik feels heavier now, leaving her questioning her decisions and her worth. In her heart, she knows she needs distance, but pulling away from him feels like uncharted territory, frightening and uncertain. The cracks in Malik's polished facade begin to show as Imani starts to retreat. His once composed demeanor shifts, subtle at first, then more overt. At practice, the confident, collected coach begins to unravel. His voice sharpens, scolding players for mistakes he once dismissed with ease. A dropped ball, a missed step. These minor errors now fuel disproportionate outbursts. Yet the true source of his frustration isn't the game. It's Imani's growing distance. Behind the scenes, Malik's frustration festers. He floods Imani's phone with messages, each one more insistent than the last. "Why are you ignoring me?" he writes. "Don't I deserve a response after everything I've done for you?" The words carry an edge, blending concern with accusation, leaving Imani trapped between guilt and the desire to escape. His tone shifts from gentle encouragement to thinly veiled anger, every message a reminder of the control he refuses to relinquish. In public, Malik tries to maintain his charm. He smiles at parents, encourages players, and speaks with authority that commands respect. But in private, the mask slips. His words to Imani grow more pointed, his demands more personal. "You're the only one who understands me," he tells her, his voice low and steady. "No one else will ever care about you the way I do." The lines blur between reassurance and manipulation, each statement tightening the emotional chains around Imani. Malik's behavior becomes erratic. One moment he's calm and persuasive, the next he's curt and cold. His need for control turns into a relentless pursuit, each interaction laced with subtle threats. "Don't push me away, Imani," he warns. The words hang in the air, heavy with implications she can't ignore. The balance of power shifts further, leaving Imani increasingly isolated. As Malik's public persona remains intact, his private manipulations escalate. The tension between these two worlds creates a suffocating pressure for Imani. She feels the weight of his expectations and the growing fear of what might happen if she continues to pull away. Her world narrows further, Malik's voice a constant presence in her mind. Every step she takes feels monitored, every decision scrutinized. The walls are closing in, and Malik's desperation for control shows no signs of stopping. Imani's world is unraveling. Malik's once soothing voice has turned harsh, his text messages relentless, demanding answers she doesn't know how to give. "Why are you ignoring me?" he writes. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." Each message tightens the grip of guilt and fear around her chest. She's tried to pull away, but every step back feels like stepping deeper into quicksand. His frustration grows sharper, his need for control more oppressive, leaving her more alone than ever. Imani's nights are restless, filled with the echoes of Malik's voice and the weight of her own spiraling thoughts. She walks through the halls of Eastwood High feeling like a shadow of herself. Her teammates' smiles seem colder now, their laughter distant, and every whispered word feels like a judgment passed behind her back. The paranoia creeps in, each glance from a classmate making her stomach churn. She tells herself it's nothing, that no one knows, but the doubt lingers, heavy and suffocating. And then it happens. At first it seems like just another day. Imani opens her locker, her hand already reaching for her books when she notices the note, neatly folded, sitting on top of her things. Her heart skips a beat as she picks it up. It's light, almost weightless, but the words written inside are anything but. "Tell someone, or I will." Her hands begin to tremble. Her mind races, grasping for an explanation, but all she can feel is the cold, hard truth. Someone knows. Someone has seen what she's been trying so desperately to hide. The note's anonymity makes it all the more terrifying. There's no name, no clue, no way to know who left it. Imani's gaze darts around the hallway. Who could it be? Lexi? Jada? Someone else? Her breath quickens as her eyes search every passing face, every lingering look. The walls feel like they're closing in, the hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. Every whisper becomes a secret shared about her. Every laugh feels like a knife in her back. Her paranoia consumes her, growing louder with every step she takes. At practice, she can't focus. Her moves feel heavy, her mind elsewhere, replaying the note over and over again. Lexi's glance in her direction feels like an accusation. Jada's polite smile feels forced, hiding something beneath the surface. Are they the ones who know? Did they leave the note? Imani tries to tell herself it's not true, that she's imagining things, but the fear won't let go. It clings to her like a shadow, dark and unshakable. She feels like a ticking time bomb, each second bringing her closer to the moment when her secret will explode into the open. As the day drags on, Imani finds herself retreating further and further into herself. The note is still tucked into her pocket, a constant reminder that she's no longer in control. She clutches it tightly, as though holding on to it will somehow keep the truth contained. But deep down she knows the damage has already been done. Someone knows. And now, the walls are closing in. Imani has been avoiding Malik for days, ignoring his texts, skipping practices, and finding every possible excuse to avoid being alone with him. But the pressure has only grown. The fear of his escalating messages and the weight of her own guilt have become too much to bear. She knows she can't run forever. So tonight, she agrees to meet him, determined to confront the truth. The gym is empty, its echoing silence only amplifying the tension in the air. Imani stands in the middle of the floor, arms crossed, her heart pounding in her chest. The faint hum of the overhead lights is in the background as Malik steps inside, his confident stride faltering when he sees her expression. "Imani," he starts, his tone laced with that familiar blend of concern and control. "I'm glad you finally showed up. I was starting to worry." She cuts him off, her voice trembling but firm. "Stop." For the first time, Malik looks uncertain. Imani's hands tremble, but she doesn't waver. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying to myself, to everyone. You've been using me, Malik. You've been manipulating me from the start." Malik's expression shifts, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he quickly masks it. "That's not true, Imani. You're overreacting. Everything we've done, you wanted this too." His voice is calm, but the tension beneath it is unmistakable. Imani's voice rises, raw with emotion. "I wanted to feel like I mattered. I wanted someone to see me, to care about me. But you didn't care about me. You just used me to feel powerful, to control me." Malik steps closer, his voice softening, calculated. "Imani, listen to me. You're confused, you're upset, and I get that. But think about it. Everything we have is real. I've been here for you in ways no one else has." Imani shakes her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You've made me believe that I needed you, but all you've done is make me feel trapped. This isn't love, it's control. And I'm done letting you control me." Malik's facade cracks, his tone sharpens, the calm veneer slipping away. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me? You don't know what you're saying, Imani. If you try to ruin me, you'll only hurt yourself." Imani takes a step back, her fear giving way to a simmering anger. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Protecting yourself. Not me, not us, just you." Her voice steadies, her resolve hardening. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Malik. I see you for who you really are." The silence that follows is deafening. Malik's jaw tightens, his eyes narrowing, but he says nothing. Imani turns and walks away, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she feels the weight of his control beginning to lift. But even as she steps into the night, her resolve firm, the shadows of Malik's threats linger in the back of her mind. She knows this isn't over. Imani's confrontation with Malik had left her shaken. The intensity of their exchange echoed in her mind long after she stormed out of the gym, her heart racing and her thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and fear. She wanted to believe that walking away was the first step toward regaining control of her life, but the grip Malik had on her psyche lingered, tightening with every passing day. She tried to move forward, to block out the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume her, but something felt off. Her body wasn't bouncing back from the stress as it usually did. She was constantly exhausted, struggling to keep up with even the simplest tasks. Practice became an uphill battle, and nausea crept in during the mornings, catching her off guard. She dismissed it at first, her mind quick to blame the emotional toll of everything she had been through. "It's just stress," she told herself. "I need to rest. I'll be fine." But the symptoms didn't fade. The fatigue grew heavier and the nausea more persistent. Imani began skipping meals, unable to keep food down without her stomach churning. The whispers of doubt she had pushed aside started growing louder, clawing at the edges of her mind. Then came the moment she couldn't ignore anymore. Alone in her room late one evening, her thoughts spiraled as her body betrayed her with another wave of sickness. A sinking feeling formed in the pit of her stomach, a realization she couldn't shake. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and searched for answers. Every symptom pointed to the same terrifying possibility, one she had refused to acknowledge until now. Her heartbeat quickened as she read the signs over and over, each word hammering home the truth she feared most. She knew she needed to be sure. The next day, she found herself standing in the pharmacy, eyes scanning the shelves. The pregnancy tests stared back at her, each box a silent accusation. Her hands shook as she reached for one, her head pounding with the weight of what this might mean. Back home, the minutes felt like hours as she waited for the result. The test sat on the counter, mocking her with its simplicity. She had followed the instructions perfectly, but the truth it held was anything but simple. 2 lines. Her breath caught in her throat as the result stared back at her. She blinked, hoping the image would change, that somehow this wasn't real. But it was. 2 unmistakable lines. The shock hit her first, a wave of disbelief crashing over her. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what this meant, and then came the fear, a raw, suffocating dread that left her trembling. Malik, he was the father. The realization alone made her chest tighten. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she sank to the floor. Her hands clutched the test, her grip tightening as if holding onto it could somehow anchor her in the storm of emotions. How did it come to this? She whispered, her voice shaking. The questions flooded her mind. How would she tell Malik? What would he say? Would he care? And what about her parents, her teammates, her future? Every path felt like a dead end. Every choice weighted with unbearable consequences. Imani buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the silence of the room. She had never felt more alone. The confrontation with Malik had taken so much from, but this was something she could never have prepared for. Her life had changed in an instant, and there was no going back. As she sat there, trembling on the floor, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. What happens now? Imani's body had been trying to tell her something for weeks. The fatigue was relentless, weighing her down no matter how much she rested. Nausea clung to her like a shadow, making even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. Her frequent headaches and sudden susceptibility to minor illnesses added to the growing unease. She tried to convince herself it was the pregnancy or the stress of everything she'd been through, but the symptoms felt more insistent, more sinister. When she finally went for a routine prenatal checkup, she hoped to find reassurance, a simple explanation for why her body felt like it was betraying her. The doctor asked about her symptoms and recommended a series of tests, standard for someone in her condition. Blood work, urine tests, and screenings were conducted swiftly, the routine nature of it calming Imani just enough to push her fears to the back of her mind. But days later, when the clinic called her back in to discuss the results, the unease returned with a vengeance. Sitting in the sterile exam room, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above, she gripped the edges of the chair, her pulse pounding in her ears. The doctor entered, holding a file that suddenly seemed impossibly heavy. "I'm so sorry, Imani," the doctor said, her voice steady but solemn. "Your test results show that you're HIV positive." The words hit like a freight train. For a moment, Imani could hear nothing but the rushing of blood in her ears. Her breath caught in her chest and the room seemed to tilt around her. She blinked as if trying to wake from a nightmare, her lips trembling as she stammered, That can't be right. There must be a mistake." The doctor's expression didn't waver. "We ran the tests twice to be sure. I know this is difficult to hear, but I'm here to help you navigate what comes next." Imani's mind reeled, her thoughts spiraling into chaos. How could this have happened? The symptoms, the unexplained illnesses, it all began to click in horrifying clarity. Malik's face flashed in her mind, and with it, the crushing weight of betrayal. Her trust, her vulnerability, her naivety, it all felt like it had been weaponized against her. Tears streamed down her face as she sat frozen, unable to process the enormity of the revelation. Her mind screamed with questions. Had Malik known? Had he hidden this from her? Had he ever cared about the risk he was exposing her to? Anger flared beneath the sorrow, a burning rage at his indifference to her safety, at herself for not walking away sooner. As the doctor explained next steps, Imani barely heard a word. Her thoughts were consumed with guilt, fear, and the crushing realization that her life had irrevocably changed. The weight of the diagnosis settled over her like a suffocating blanket, and all she could think was, how am I going to survive this? In the days that followed, the question haunted her. She felt paralyzed, unable to decide what to do next. Should she confront Malik? Should she tell anyone? Every option seemed fraught with danger, and the fear of his reaction loomed large. Her isolation grew heavier with each passing moment, and the secret she carried felt too much for one person to bear. Her hands trembled as she sat alone in her room. The test results clutched tightly in her grip. The future felt impossibly bleak, and the walls of her life seemed to close in around her. Whispers of doubt filled her mind, but through it all, one thought persisted, stark and unrelenting. Nothing would ever be the same again. Imani sits on the edge of her bed, staring at the journal that holds weeks of her deepest fears and frustrations. The words stare back at her like a mirror, her guilt, her anger, her confusion, all spilling out onto the pages. She runs her fingers over a sentence she wrote just days ago. How much longer can I live like this? How much more of myself do I have to lose? The weight of everything presses down on her. Her pregnancy, the devastating diagnosis, and the realization of how deeply Malik has manipulated her. Memories of his smooth words and empty reassurances churn in her mind, each one now feeling like a hollow echo of control. She tries to push it all aside, but the truth feels like a stone in her chest, too heavy to carry any longer. Her mind races through the possibilities, confronting him, staying silent, walking away. Fear rises like a tidal wave, but then she remembers all she's lost, her trust in herself, her friendships, her sense of freedom. And in that moment, anger overtakes fear. She knows she cannot carry this burden alone anymore. This is his fault. He needs to know. He needs to answer for this. Imani grabs her phone, her hands trembling as she types a message to Malik. We need to talk. Meet me after practice. Her thumb hovers over the send button, doubt clouding her thoughts. What if he denies everything? What if he turns this around on her? But another voice pushes through the fear, steady and clear. I can't keep letting him control me. I need to take back my power. She presses send. There's no turning back now. The gym is silent when they meet, the echo of her footsteps filling the space as she walks in. Malik greets her with his usual calm demeanor, his smile disarming. But this time she doesn't return it. Her body feels rigid, her jaw clenched. She takes a deep breath and speaks, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm pregnant, she begins, her eyes locking on his, and I just found out I have HIV. Her words hang in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Malik's expression falters for only a second before his calm composure returns. Imani, you're overthinking this, he says, his tone disturbingly nonchalant. We'll figure this out. It's not a big deal. Imani freezes, her breath catching in her throat. His lack of shock, his casual dismissal, it all clicks in an instant. Her eyes widen, and a cold wave of realization crashes over her. You knew, she whispers, her voice trembling with disbelief. You knew, didn't you? You knew you had HIV, and you didn't tell me. Malik takes a step closer, raising his hands as if to calm her. Imani, listen, you're blowing this out of proportion. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that we stick together and handle it. But his words only fuel her rage. She steps back, her voice rising. You infected me. You knew, and you didn't say anything. You let me trust you, believe in you, and the whole time you were lying to me. How could you do this to me? Malik's mask of calm begins to crack. Imani, stop, he says, his voice hardening. You knew what this was. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here. We both made choices. His deflection is like gasoline on a fire. Imani's hands shake, but she doesn't back down. Choices? You took my choices away. You manipulated me, isolated me, made me believe I had no one else. And now this? You've destroyed my life. Malik's tone shifts again, colder now. Be careful what you say, Imani. You think people will believe you? You'll ruin your life more than mine if this gets out. The veiled threat sends a shiver down her spine, but it also solidifies her resolve. For the first time, she sees Malik clearly. Not as the caring mentor he pretended to be, but as a manipulator, someone who thrives on control and fear. Her voice steadies as she takes a step back, reclaiming the space between them. Imani's voice trembles, but her resolve is unshakable. I'm done, Malik. Done with your lies, your manipulation, and everything you've taken from me. You can never control me anymore. Malik glares at her, his composure cracking. You think walking away changes anything? You'll never be free of this, of me. Her heart pounds, her body heavy with the weight of what she's carrying, literally and figuratively. The pregnancy, the diagnosis, the fear of an uncertain future, they all press down on her like a crushing wave. But in this moment, she takes a deep breath and faces the storm head-on. You're wrong, she says, her voice steady now. You don't get to decide what happens next. I don't know how, but I'll find a way to deal with this, without you. She turns and walks away, each step feeling like an uphill climb. Her mind is a whirlwind of emotions, grief, anger, fear, but underneath it all is a flicker of resolve. She doesn't have all the answers yet, and her path forward is anything but clear. But she knows one thing for certain. She won't let Malik's betrayal define the rest of her life. As she steps out of the gym and into the night, Imani feels the weight of her reality. The challenges ahead seem insurmountable. Pregnancy, HIV, and the scars of manipulation. But she takes comfort in one small truth. This is the first decision she's made for herself in a long time. It's not freedom, not yet. But it's a step toward reclaiming her voice, her agency, and her future. But the peace is fleeting. Days pass, and Malik's attempts to regain control over her intensify. His texts grow more insistent, his tone more demanding, until finally she finds a note slipped into her locker. We need to talk. Don't ignore me. The message is curt but charged, each word a reminder that Malik doesn't let go easily. Imani stares at the note, her pulse quickening. She knows what this means. Ignoring him would only escalate the situation. If she has any hope of reclaiming her life, she has to face him. But the thought alone sends a shiver down her spine. Hours pass, and the storm outside builds in ferocity, mirroring the chaos brewing in her mind. The rain lashes against her window as she wrestles with her decision. Confronting Malik feels like walking into the lion's den, but avoiding him only feeds his belief that he still controls her. She steels herself, knowing this isn't just about their toxic relationship, it's about taking back her power. Tonight she would face Malik, and no matter what, she would make him understand that she was done being his victim. Later that evening, the storm rages at full force as Imani steps into the night. Each step toward the gym feels heavier than the last, the thunder rumbling in the distance echoing her heartbeat. The rain soaks her through, cold and unrelenting, but she doesn't stop. Her legs tremble, her stomach churns, and her thoughts swirl between fear and resolve. She knows this confrontation could change everything, and yet she keeps moving forward. Inside the gym, Malik is pacing. His phone clutched tightly in one hand, his other hand runs through his hair in frustration. The flickering lights above cast jagged shadows across the empty space, amplifying the tension. His mind is a storm of its own, plans, excuses, and justifications colliding as he waits. He's losing control of Imani, and the realization is driving him mad. She was supposed to be his. The idea that she might slip away is unbearable. The door creaks open and Imani steps inside. Her soaked hair clings to her face, her breaths come in uneven gasps, but her eyes are steady, focused. Malik stops pacing and turns to face her, his expression a mix of anger and relief. "You came," he says, his voice low and sharp. Imani shuts the door behind her, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. The storm outside crescendos, thunder rattling the windows, but inside, the silence between them is deafening. She grips the straps of her bag tightly, her knuckles white, as she takes a step forward. "You said we needed to talk," she says, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "So talk." Malik's jaw tightens as he takes a step closer. His movements are sharp, erratic, as if he's barely holding himself together. "Why have you been avoiding me?" he demands, his voice laced with frustration. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me." Imani feels the weight of his words pressing down on her, but she doesn't flinch. The storm outside is nothing compared to the storm within her. "Everything you've done for me?" she echoes, her voice rising. "You've done nothing but destroy me, Malik, and now I'm done." The flickering lights cast eerie shadows around them, the tension so thick it feels like the air has been sucked from the room. Malik's desperation is palpable, his need to reassert control driving him to the brink. But Imani's resolve is stronger now. She won't back down. Not this time. As the storm rages outside, the stage is set for a confrontation that will change everything. The weight of their choices, their lies, and their pain converges in this moment, with violence lingering in the air like a storm about to break. The storm rages on outside, its thunder a haunting echo of the chaos unfolding within. Imani stands her ground in the center of the gym, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "You've ruined my life, Malik," she says, her eyes blazing despite the tears threatening to fall. "And you don't even care." Malik steps forward, his movements sharp and deliberate, the tension in his body evident. "Care?" he retorts, his voice laced with condescension. "I've cared more than anyone else ever has for you, Imani. I've been there for you when no one else was." Imani shakes her head, her frustration boiling over. "Don't twist this, Malik. You didn't care about me. You cared about control. You used me, and now I'm left to pick up the pieces while you stand there acting like the victim." The flickering gym lights cast erratic shadows on Malik's face, amplifying the cracks in his composure. He scoffs, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're emotional, overreacting. Everything that happened, you wanted it too. Don't blame me for your choices." But Imani doesn't flinch. For the first time in their twisted relationship, her voice cuts through with unwavering certainty. "I was vulnerable, and you knew it. You saw someone who needed help, and you turned me into your pawn. Don't you dare act like this is my fault." Malik's calm facade continues to crumble, his desperation bleeding through in the way his voice sharpens and his pacing quickens. "You think anyone will believe you? I'm the respected one, Imani. You're just a scared little girl who doesn't know what she wants. If you push me, you'll regret it." The storm outside howls as Imani steps forward, her defiance breaking through her fear. "I'm not scared of you anymore, Malik. You can't intimidate me, and you can't gaslight me into believing I'm the one at fault here." Malik stops pacing, his expression darkening as he towers over her, the space between them disappearing. "You don't get it, do you?" he growls. "Without me, you're nothing. I gave you everything. I own you." Imani's heart pounds, but her resolve doesn't waver. She looks up at him, her voice steady despite the fury in her chest. "You didn't give me anything but pain, and you will never own me. Not now, not ever." For a moment there's silence, heavy and suffocating, as the storm pauses outside. Malik's jaw tightens, his fists clenching at his sides. Then, with a sudden burst of rage, he lunges toward her, the physical violence erupting as the culmination of all the emotional chaos. His hand strikes out, the sound echoing in the empty gym. Imani stumbles but catches herself and regains her footing, her strength overpowering her pain. She glares at him, her voice now low but seething with defiance. "This ends now, Malik. You don't get to hurt me anymore." The storm outside resumes its relentless fury, a fitting backdrop for the collision between the two. The confrontation has reached its boiling point, leaving no room for reconciliation, only the raw, unrelenting fallout of their toxic relationship. The storm outside grows fiercer, lightning streaking across the sky and thunder shaking the gym walls. Inside, the air is suffocating with tension, thick with the weight of unspoken truths and boiling emotions. Imani stares at Malik, her body trembling from pain and exhaustion but refusing to falter. The conversation that began as a desperate attempt to reason with him has unraveled into something far more dangerous. Malik circles her like a predator, his desperation evident in every sharp movement. His voice, once calm and calculated, now drips with venom. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just walk away and leave me behind? I gave you everything, Imani. You owe me." Imani clenches her fists, summoning courage she didn't know she had left. "You didn't give me anything, Malik. You took everything, and I'm done letting you control me." The words hang in the air, daring him to respond. Malik's face twists with rage, his carefully constructed facade crumbling more and more till it disappeared. He lunges at her, his movements swift and feral. Imani stumbles back, her heart pounding as she braces herself. She catches his arms, trying to push him away, but his strength overwhelms her. "Please, Malik," she gasps, her voice trembling. "Don't do this." But Malik is beyond reason. His grip tightens, his voice a growl. "You don't get to leave me, Imani. Not now, not ever." The struggle is chaotic, a desperate dance of survival. The sounds of their fight echo through the empty gym. The crash of bodies against lockers, the scrape of shoes on the polished floor, the ragged gasps for air. Imani fights with everything she has, her body screaming in protest as she pushes against Malik's overpowering force. But her strength is no match for his unrelenting rage. In a single brutal moment, Malik's fury reaches its peak. His hand strikes Imani with a force that sends her crumpling to the ground. The air is knocked from her lungs as she hits the floor, her vision blurry. For a moment, the world seems to freeze. Imani's breath shallow, her body motionless, the storm outside a deafening backdrop to the violence inside. Malik stands over her, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Panic sets in as he realizes what he's done. He paces the gym, muttering to himself, his hands trembling. "What have I done? This wasn't supposed to happen." But the panic quickly gives way to cold calculation. Malik moves with urgency, wiping down surfaces, rearranging Imani's belongings, and planting a silver whistle near her body. He glances around the gym, ensuring no detail is overlooked. The staging is meticulous, designed to look like a robbery gone wrong, a desperate attempt to erase the evidence of his rage. Rain pounds against the windows as Malik grabs his jacket and flees the scene. He doesn't look back, his mind a storm of fear and guilt. The headlights of a passing car briefly illuminate his face as he disappears into the night, the echoes of his crime reverberating through the empty gym. And there, in the silence that follows, Imani lies lifeless. A tragic end to a life full of promise, stolen by the man who claimed to love her. The storm rages on, both outside and in the hearts of those who will soon uncover the devastating truth. The gym feels eerily quiet in the aftermath. Detective Reed steps inside, the storm outside still rumbling as rain streams down the windows. His sharp eyes scan the room, taking in the overturned chair, the scattered papers, and the faint trace of blood on the floor. The scene is unsettling, too chaotic to be random, but too neat to be unplanned. Something is off, and Reed knows it. He kneels beside the silver whistle, carefully bagging it as evidence. His gaze lingers on the unfinished message on Imani's phone, the words cut off mid-thought. Reed feels the weight of the scene, the senselessness of a young life cut short. There's a story here, one he doesn't yet fully understand, but the clues whisper of something far more personal than a random act of violence. She was targeted, Reed murmurs to himself, but why? The forensic team works methodically, gathering samples and taking photographs. Reed questions them, his tone calm but urgent. Anything unusual? He asks. One of the technicians points to the blood trail leading to the door. The trail stops abruptly. It doesn't continue outside. Whoever did this was careful, too careful. Reed nods, his mind racing. The whistle and the phone, they weren't left here by accident. Someone's trying to control the narrative. He steps back, observing the scene as a whole. The gym, once a place of activity and achievement, now feels like a mausoleum. Every detail feels significant, yet the full picture eludes him. He knows better than to jump to conclusions, but his instincts tell him this wasn't random. The meticulous nature of the scene suggests a deliberate act, and Reed is determined to uncover the truth. As the investigation progresses, Reed begins to dig deeper into Imani's life. Interviews with her teammates paint a picture of someone who had been pulling away, isolating herself in the weeks leading up to her death. She wasn't herself, one teammate says. She skipped practices, and when she did show up, she seemed distant, like her mind was somewhere else. Another adds, I tried asking her what was wrong, but she shut me out. She didn't want to talk about it. Reed listens intently, piecing together fragments of Imani's final days. Each conversation adds a layer to the puzzle, but it's still incomplete. The same pattern emerges in his conversations with her family. Imani's mother, Samantha, speaks with a voice heavy with regret. I thought she was doing fine, Samantha says. She always seemed so strong. I didn't see how much she was struggling. Reed nods sympathetically. Did she mention anyone she was close to? Someone she might have confided in? Samantha hesitates. There was her coach, Malik. She spent a lot of time with him. I thought he was just helping her with her game. But now, I'm not so sure. That name sticks with Reed. Malik, the coach. The person who should have been a mentor, a protector. Something about it doesn't sit right. Reed digs into Malik's background, finding inconsistencies that raise red flags. His alibi for the night of Imani's death doesn't hold up under scrutiny, and his interactions with her seem overly familiar in witness accounts. Reed's frustration grows as the pieces refuse to come together. Every lead feels like a thread unraveling into more questions. The janitor's criminal record provides a tempting red herring, but Reed pushes past it, trusting his instincts. It's not him, he mutters. This feels personal. The deeper he digs, the more convinced he becomes that the answers lie with Malik. But Reed knows he needs more than a hunch. He needs hard evidence. The weight of the case bears down on him, but his resolve only strengthens. Imani deserves justice, and Reed won't stop until he uncovers the truth. The storm outside begins to ease, but inside the pressure only builds. Reed stares at the evidence board, the scattered photos and notes, his mind racing. I'm missing something, he thinks. It's right in front of me, but I can't see it yet. But he will. Reed has solved cases like this before, cases where the truth hides in the smallest details, waiting for someone determined enough to find it. And for Imani, Reed is determined to find it all. Meanwhile, across town, another layer of truth begins to unravel. Angela could no longer ignore the growing unease. Malik's behavior had changed, his once confident demeanor replaced with agitation, defensiveness, and a deliberate distance. Every attempt to ask about Imani's death was met with a cold wall of silence. Angela's intuition whispered that something was deeply wrong. At first, she tried to rationalize it. Stress, she thought. Grief. Maybe even guilt over some secret he hadn't shared. But the more she observed him, the harder it became to believe her own excuses. Malik avoided eye contact, his answers clipped and evasive. And the more Angela pressed, the more irritable and defensive he became. One evening, while Malik was in the shower, Angela noticed his laptop left open on the dining table. Her breath quickened. She hesitated, a war of loyalty and suspicion raging inside her. But as her unease mounted, Her instincts won out. She sat down and began scrolling through his messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Brief exchanges with colleagues, innocuous reminders. But then she saw Imani's name. The messages between Malik and Imani were frequent, personal, and intimate. Angela's stomach churned as the realization of an affair began to dawn on her. But it was the next message that stopped her cold. "We'll meet at the gym tonight. Don't tell anyone. I need you, Imani." Her heart raced as she read the words over and over again. It was from the night of Imani's death. Angela's hands trembled, her mind reeling. Malik had been with Imani that night, and now she couldn't unsee it. The shock of the discovery rippled through her, leaving her breathless. She stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and devastation washing over her. How could the man she trusted, the father of her children, have been capable of this? And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Angela shut the laptop and leaned back in her chair, her body trembling. Questions swirled in her mind. Had Malik killed Imani? Was this why he'd been so withdrawn, so defensive? The man she thought she knew felt like a stranger, a dangerous stranger. She wanted to confront him, to scream him, to demand answers, but fear rooted her to her seat. What would he do if she confronted him? Would he deny it? Would he turn violent? Angela clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. She couldn't act rashly. She needed to think. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of the betrayal settled in. But amidst the heartbreak, one truth became clear. She couldn't stay silent. Imani's life had been taken, and Angela knew she held the key to exposing Malik's involvement. After a long, agonizing moment, Angela grabbed her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she scrolled to find Detective Reed's number. She paused, her heart pounding. What would happen to her family if Malik was arrested? What would happen to her children? The thought was unbearable, but so was the idea of protecting him after what she'd found. She pressed the call button. When Reed answered, calm and professional, Angela's voice cracked under the weight of her emotions. "Detective, I have something you need to see. It's about Malik. It's important." As she ended the call, Angela collapsed onto the couch, tears slipping down her cheeks. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fear, they consumed her. But beneath the pain, a faint glimmer of resolve began to emerge. Angela knew one thing with certainty. If Malik was capable of this, she and her family could be next. Exposing him wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the only way to stop the monster she now saw in him. For her children, for herself, for justice. The pieces of the puzzle had been scattered, frustrating and elusive. But now, with Angela's evidence in hand, Detective Reed's vision became clear. The text messages she uncovered were the missing link, tying together every other clue from the crime scene. The silver whistle, the blood-stained footprints, the hastily staged surroundings, each fragment now fit perfectly into the timeline. Sitting at his desk, Reed meticulously traced the sequence of events. The texts between Malik and Imani, combined with the timeline of that fateful night, painted a chilling picture. Reed leaned back, his mind piecing together the motive that tied it all together. Malik hadn't just been desperate to control Imani, he had been desperate to silence her. He stood abruptly, his determination sharper than ever. The evidence is undeniable, he thought. This ends now. Angela's role in this breakthrough wasn't lost on him. She had risked everything to bring these texts forward, defying her fear, her loyalty, and the heavy weight of betrayal. Reed's voice softened as he called her to share the progress. "Angela, you've done more than you realize. You've given Imani the voice she never had. We're going to take him down." On the other end, Angela's resolve shone through, even as her voice wavered. I couldn't let him get away with it." Reed hung up, his focus unyielding. With the final pieces of evidence reviewed, he coordinated with his team. Every second felt like a countdown. Malik was still out there, oblivious to the walls closing in around him. The storm that had brewed for so long was about to come crashing down. The team gathered, their energy tense but controlled. Reed's instructions were clear. "We have what we need. The messages, the timeline, the whistle. It all points to Malik. We move tonight. No mistakes." As he prepared for the operation, Reed caught one final detail in the case files. It was a small inconsistency in the bloodstain pattern, subtle but significant. His eyes narrowed as the realization hit. This detail was the final nail in Malik's coffin, confirming not just his presence at the gym, but his attempt to stage the scene. Reed's jaw tightened. "It's over, Malik," he muttered under his breath. The storm outside mirrored the urgency inside. Rain lashed against the precinct windows as the team mobilized. Reed, calm but resolute, knew what lay ahead. The confrontation with Malik would be intense, but the truth was finally on his side. And so, with Angela's bravery lighting the way and the evidence now airtight, Reed moved toward the climax of the case. Justice for Imani wasn't just an idea anymore. It was within reach. The assembly hall is filled with the usual hum of chatter. Students adjust their chairs, teachers glance at their notes, and Malik stands at the front, projecting the confident ease of a man in control. For those in the audience, it feels like just another ordinary day. But Detective Reed, standing quietly in the back, knows this is the moment everything changes. Reed enters quietly, his presence a stark contrast to the lively chatter of the room. The air shifts, the tension palpable as he locks eyes with Malik. Reed walks forward, his voice steady, cutting through the noise. "Malik Henderson, you're under arrest." The room falls silent, the students freeze, their eyes wide with disbelief. Teachers exchange stunned glances. Malik turns, his calm demeanor faltering for the final time. "This has to be a mistake," he says, his voice laced with a thin veneer of composure. "You can't be serious." Reed steps closer, unflinching. "We have the evidence, text messages, a staged crime scene, and the timeline of your movements that night. It's over, Malik." Malik's smile wavers, replaced by a flicker of panic. He glances at the crowd, searching for support among familiar faces. "This is ridiculous," he shouts, his voice cracking. "You're making a huge mistake. I loved those kids. I loved Imani." Gasps ripple through the assembly. Students exchange hushed whispers, their admiration for Malik clashing with the horrifying reality of his guilt. A teacher, her voice trembling, murmurs, "How could he?" Reed doesn't waver. He steps forward, holding the evidence in his hand. "You took advantage of your position, your trust, your power. You betrayed the very people who looked up to you, and you thought you could get away with it." Malik's composure shatters. His voice rises, desperate and erratic. "You don't understand. She wanted to be with me. She needed me. This isn't my fault." His frantic attempts to justify his actions only deepen the crowd's shock. A student's voice pierces the silence, raw with emotion. "You were supposed to protect us, not hurt us." In the background, Angela watches, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. Her hands tremble as she grips the back of a chair for support. This is the man she thought she knew, the man she trusted with her life. And now, he stands exposed, his lies unraveling in front of everyone. Her internal battle is visible, relief that the truth has come to light, mingled with the unbearable weight of betrayal. "I had to do this," she whispers to herself. "For me, for everyone he hurt." Malik, now visibly shaken, pleads with Reed. "Please, you don't have to do this. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean for it to end like this. I can make this right." Reed doesn't flinch. His voice is firm, final. "You made your choice, Malik. Now you'll face the consequences." As handcuffs click around Malik's wrists, the weight of his actions settles over the room. The students watch, their idol reduced to a man stripped of his charm and control. A teacher shakes her head, her voice heavy with disbelief. "We trusted him." Reed turns to the crowd, his tone somber but resolute. "Imani Wilson's life was taken far too soon, and today we take the first step toward justice. No one is above accountability." The room remains heavy with emotion. Anger, sadness, and the bitter sting of betrayal. Malik is led away, his head hung low as the crowd watches in stunned silence. Outside, the storm begins to subside, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. Justice, though long overdue, is finally on the horizon. The storm outside had finally subsided, but the storm Malik had created was just beginning to unfold. The day of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community, a coach once admired, now exposed for his betrayal. The whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire, but the truth had already been set in motion. Malik Henderson would now face the justice system, and the courtroom would become the stage for his reckoning. Days later, the courtroom is filled to capacity. Reporters line the back, their cameras poised to capture every moment. Students and faculty sit shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with a mix of grief, anger, and disbelief. At the center of it all, Samantha Carter grips her daughter's journal tightly, the pages worn from the countless times she's read Imani's words. She knows this trial is not just for Imani, but for everyone Malik's lies have impacted. Samantha is the first to take the stand. Her voice trembles as she reads from Imani's journal, her tears soaking the words that once belonged to her daughter. He said it was love, but it felt like a cage, she reads, each word a dagger to the heart. I don't know if I'll ever escape. The weight of her testimony hangs heavy in the air, leaving no doubt about the pain Imani endured. Jada follows, her best friend's story spilling out in fragments of sorrow and regret. She was scared, Jada says, her voice breaking. She didn't know how to ask for help, and I didn't know how to see it. She trusted him, and he destroyed her. As the testimonies unfold, Malik sits at the defense table, his polished composure visibly cracked beyond repair. He leans toward his lawyer, whispering frantically, his once commanding voice reduced to barely audible murmurs. His attorney's weak defense, claims of misunderstandings and circumstantial evidence, fails to resonate. The jury watches Malik closely, their expressions shifting from intrigue to disdain. Detective Reed stands next, presenting the evidence with precision. The texts, the staged crime scene, the timeline of his movements, they all lead to one man, Reed states firmly. Malik Henderson used his position of trust to manipulate, control, and ultimately silence Imani Wilson. But today her voice speaks louder than ever. Malik rises to his feet, his voice growing desperate. "This isn't true," he shouts, his composure unraveling completely. "I loved her. I never meant for this to happen." His outburst only deepens the silence in the room, the echoes of his guilt reverberating louder than his words. The jury deliberates. The weight of their decision is etched onto their faces as they file back into the room. The foreperson's voice shakes slightly as the verdict is read. "We find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." Gasps ripple through the courtroom, followed by an overwhelming wave of emotion. Samantha collapses into tears, her cries muffled against her husband's shoulder. "Finally," she whispers, "finally, justice." Jada clutches her hands tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispers a soft goodbye to her friend. Malik stands frozen, his once confident mask shattered to pieces. He mutters to himself, disbelief dripping from every word. "This isn't happening. I did everything right. I was supposed to win." But there is no victory for him here. As the handcuffs click around his wrists, his fall from grace is complete. Detective Reed steps forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Imani Wilson's life was taken far too soon, but today we honor her memory. Justice has been served." The crowd slowly disperses, but the impact of the trial lingers in every tear-streaked face. Outside, the sun breaks through the clouds, its light a quiet reminder that even in the aftermath of betrayal, justice and healing are possible. The courtroom may have delivered justice, but the echoes of Imani's story extended far beyond its walls. Her death revealed not just the tragedy of one life lost, but the devastating silence that allowed it to happen. The pain of realizing how many signs were missed, how many cries for help went unheard, united the community in a shared determination. Imani's story would never be forgotten, and no one else would suffer in the same way. At Eastwood High, the halls that once carried whispers of betrayal now buzzed with purpose. Teachers, students, and families alike recognized the gaps that had left Imani vulnerable. Gaps in education, support, and awareness. The school launched programs bearing Imani's name, designed to educate and empower. Workshops on recognizing emotional manipulation, mentorships for young women, and HIV awareness campaigns became pillars of her legacy. These initiatives transformed the pain of her loss into a force for positive change. In the heart of the school, outside the gym where her life was cut short, the community gathered for a memorial. A tree was planted, a symbol of resilience and hope. Its roots would grow deep, just as the lessons from Imani's story would take hold in the hearts of those who knew her. A plaque beneath the tree bore a simple but powerful inscription. "In memory of Imani Wilson, a voice that will never be silenced." It was a solemn reminder of her strength and the changes her story inspired. Jada stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. Imani was more than a friend, she was a light. We failed to see her pain, but we won't let her story end in darkness. We will carry her memory forward, and through her, we'll protect others. The memorial service marked a turning point, not just for the school, but for the entire community. Organizations rallied to extend Imani's legacy beyond Eastwood. Local health clinics began offering free HIV testing and counseling. Support groups for emotional abuse survivors sprang up, ensuring that no one would feel alone as Imani once had. The community understood that this was not just about Imani, it was about confronting the systemic failures that allowed her to slip through the cracks. One by one, students placed flowers and notes beneath the tree, their silent vows woven into its roots. "We will stand up," they whispered. "We will speak out. We will protect one another." Angela, standing quietly among the crowd, reflected on her own role in exposing the truth. The weight of her decision still lingered, but so did the clarity of knowing she had done the right thing. For Detective Reed, the sight of the community rallying in Imani's name brought a rare moment of solace. Justice had been served, but Imani's legacy was the true triumph. Her strength didn't end with her life, he thought. It's just beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its golden light filtered through the branches of the memorial tree. The warmth of the moment was undeniable, a sign that healing was possible, that even in the shadow of tragedy, there was hope. Imani's truth had sparked a movement, one born from the collective pain of realizing how easily a life could be lost, and how necessary it was to ensure that no cry for help was ever ignored again. Her story, once marked by betrayal and silence, now stood as a testament to resilience, courage, and the unyielding power of a voice determined to be heard. The courtroom had delivered justice, but for the community, healing was only just beginning. Imani Wilson's story, her pain, her strength, left an indelible mark. It was no longer just about mourning her loss. It was about ensuring that her voice, silenced in life, would echo for generations. Outside Eastwood High, where her laughter once filled the halls, the memorial tree stood tall. Its roots, a symbol of resilience, and its branches, a testament to the strength Imani's story had given those she left behind, reached skyward. Around its base, students, teachers, and friends gathered, clutching flowers, handwritten notes, and cherished mementos. Jada stepped forward, holding Imani's bracelet, the one she always wore. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was unshakable. This was her truth. This was her gift to all of us. I'll carry it with me, always. And so will this tree. It'll carry her strength, her story, for generations. One by one, others followed, laying tokens of remembrance at the tree's base. Samantha, Imani's mother, placed her daughter's journal beneath the plaque that read, "In memory of Imani Wilson, a voice that will never be silenced." Jada opened the journal, her hands shaking, and read aloud Imani's final words, "My truth will outlive me." The crowd stood silent, the weight of those words settling over them. Then, as if drawn together by an unspoken bond, they spoke in unison, their voices strong and unwavering. "We will stand up. We will speak out. We will protect each other." This was more than a promise. It was a declaration, a collective resolve forged from shared grief, love, and determination. They vowed that no one else would suffer in silence, that no cry for help would ever be ignored again. The tree, adorned with flowers and letters, became a living monument to Imani's enduring impact. In the months that followed, her story rippled far beyond Eastwood High. Schools across the state adopted mentorship programs in her name. Health organizations launched campaigns to educate about emotional abuse and HIV awareness. Conversations once shrouded in shame and silence now took center stage, powered by Imani's truth. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the setting sun bathed the tree in a golden glow. It stood firm, its branches stretching toward the heavens, much like the spirit of the girl it now honored. For Samantha, Jada, and the rest of the community, Imani's story was no longer just a tragedy. It was a legacy. A reminder that one voice, no matter how quiet, could inspire a chorus of change. And as the wind carried their whispered vows into the horizon, one truth remained unshaken. Imani's voice would never be silenced. Her strength, her story, would live on, in every life she touched, and in every step the community took toward a brighter, safer future.
Hey, before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our amazing community and stay connected with fresh content every single day. It's free, it's easy, and it guarantees you'll never miss out on the stories, insights, and adventures we share. So go ahead, Click subscribe, and let's make every day unforgettable together.